July 1944, a sunken lane south of Saint-Lô. If you are the tanker riding in the second Sherman in that column, hull down between two hedge banks with the hatch cracked for air, the first thing you know of the gun is the tank ahead of you. One moment it is rolling. The next, it is stopped and burning, a single clean hole punched through the front plate. The crack of the shot reaches you a full second after the hole appears. That means the gun that did it is far away. Far enough that the sound lagged the strike. Somewhere out past 1,000 yards, hidden in a tree line you cannot pick out, sits an 88mm gun, and your own 75mm cannot reach it, cannot hurt it, and cannot even find it. For 2 months, that was the arithmetic of Normandy. The German 88 burned tanks at a mile, and the American answer took months to arrive. When it came from overhead. The answer to a gun on the ground turned out to be an airplane, a fat-nosed fighter with 850 caliber Brownings and a belly full of rockets, and the Germans had a name for it before the Americans did. They called it the J-bow. This is the story of the gun that owned a mile of open ground, and the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt that took the open sky away from it and left its crews afraid to move by daylight. The gun earned its terror honestly. The weapon was the 8.8cm Flak, the piece every Allied soldier learned to call the ARCT, the 88. It began life as an anti-aircraft gun, built to throw a shell miles into the sky at a bomber. Someone in the German army noticed early that a gun designed to hit a moving aircraft at altitude could just as easily hit a tank on the ground, and the shell that could reach a bomber could go through anything that drove. The Flak 36 version threw its armor-piercing round at roughly 2,600 feet a second. At 1,000 yards, it drove close to 4 inches of steel. At 2,000 yards, more than a mile, it still bit through better than 3 inches. There was no American or British tank in Normandy whose front plate could stop that shot at those ranges. The gun came to Normandy with its reputation already made. German crews first learned in the Spanish Civil War that a flak gun could defeat a tank. In May of 1940, at Arras in France, British Matilda tanks with armor too thick for the standard German anti-tank gun rolled forward, and the small 37mm guns bounced off. German crews swung their 88s level and stopped the Matildas cold. The next year, in the North African desert under Rommel, the gun earned its legend for good at a pass the British came to call Hellfire. There, dug-in 88s let British armor drive into range, then knocked out tank after tank across open ground the tankers could not cross alive. By the time the Americans met it in the hedgerows, the 88 was already the most respected gun on the battlefield, and the men who served it knew exactly what it could do. Then came the purpose-built anti-tank version, the Pak-43, a gun made from the start to defeat armor and nothing else. It had a nearly flat trajectory out to 1,000 yards, which matters more than it sounds. A flat-shooting gun does not need the gunner to guess the range perfectly. He lays the sight on the tank, and the shell goes where the sight points. At 1,000 yards, It punches close to 6 inches of armor. A trained crew put out 6 or 7 aimed rounds a minute. Its effective anti-tank reach ran out past 4,000 yards. The men who served it could engage an American tank column long before that column could see anything to shoot back at. Those numbers where a tanker lived, and they stop being numbers. An American Sherman carried a 75mm gun that, against the front of a German heavy, had to close inside 500 or 600 yards to have a real chance, and sometimes failed even then. The 88 opened the account at 2,000. That gap from 500 yards to 2,000 is 1.5 miles of ground the German crew owned outright. Inside it, they could see you, hit you, and burn you, and you could do nothing but keep closing and hope. The bocage made it worse. Normandy south of the beaches was a maze of small fields, boxed in by earth banks grown thick with hedge, and every one of those banks was a possible firing position. A single 88, dug in low with its long barrel laid down one of those sunken lanes, could not be seen until it fired, and by the time it fired a tank was already dead. American crews came to suspect every hedgerow of hiding a battery. A Canadian soldier who fought there put the fear plainly. He said, and this is his own account as it was later printed, in Normandy he saw one knock out 8 of their tanks, one after another, and they did not even know where the thing was hidden. That was the daily price. 8 tanks to 1 gun, and the crews never located it. When the Polish 1st Armored Division went into action near the village of Saint-Aignan-de-Clamesnil in early August, its leading armored regiment ran straight into a German anti-tank screen and lost 26 of its Shermans in a single day of fighting. The guns were dug in and camouflaged, firing from ranges the Polish tankers could not match. Not a rumor of a good gun. A gun that emptied whole squadrons of tanks and left the survivors staring at empty tree lines, unable to shoot back. Through June and July, the American tanker lived inside a gap he had no tool to close. Trin told a Sherman crew that met a German heavy or a dug-in 88 to do 2 things. Shoot for the tracks. Use the ground. Break the enemy's mobility if you cannot break his armor, and never sit still in the open where a gun a mile off could find you. It was sound advice, and it was an admission. The tool in the tanker's hands could not win the duel it was in. Crews learned to move hedge to hedge, to keep an earth bank between themselves and the far tree line, to send infantry ahead on foot to find the guns the hard way, 1 casualty at a time. They took their losses and they kept pushing, and every mile of Norman road was paid for in burning tanks. The grind ran for weeks. Through June and into July, the American advance measured itself in hedgerows, 1 field at a time, against a defense built on hidden guns and the 88 at its center. The town of Saint-Lô, a road hub the Americans needed, took more than a month and thousands of casualties to reach. Every attempt to break into open country ran into the same wall of anti-tank fire from ground the Germans had chosen and the Americans could not see. The answer on the ground, when it finally came in late July, was a breakout called Cobra, and it opened with heavy bombers carpeting a narrow strip of German front to punch a hole the armor could pour through. That hole is what let the American columns loose into the open country where the fighter bombers could finally do their worst. And it is what forced the Germans into the daylight counterattack at Mortain that the Thunderbolts were waiting for. But the 88 had a weakness, and it lived in the very thing that made it deadly. The gun and its carriage weighed about 5 tons. Standing in firing position on its cruciform base, the piece rose over 7 feet, a tall silhouette that took a crew of most of a dozen men to serve and a heavy half-track to tow. It could not be picked up and carried, nor could it be shifted in a hurry. Once it was sighted and dug in, it was committed to that spot, and moving it meant hitching it to its prime mover, folding the trail legs, and hauling 5 tons of steel down a road in plain view. On the ground, at a mile, none of that helped the tanker. The gun was hidden, and he was not. But that heaviness, that need to be towed slowly down open roads, was the seam the answer would pry open. The 88 ruled the ground. It could not rule the road it had to travel on, and it could not rule the sky at all. The answer was already being built on Long Island by a man most of those tankers never heard of. His name was Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian immigrant and the chief designer at Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, New York. The reports coming back from Europe in 1940 told him what a fighter would need to survive, and he drew the largest single-engine fighter any nation flew in the whole war. At the heart of it, he put a Pratt & Whitney R2800, a big radial engine of about 2,000 horsepower. He fed it with a turbo supercharger so bulky he had to run the ducting the length of the fuselage to fit it in behind the pilot. That machine flew for the first time in 1941. It weighed as much as some light bombers. Pilots looked at it and called it the Jug. What Kartveli built was tough in a way that mattered on the day. The Thunderbolt could take hits that would have brought other fighters down and keep flying. Pilots came home with cylinders shot off the engine, with wings holed, with pieces of the tail gone, and the airplane carried them back. Toughness is the whole reason it could do the job that answered the 88, because the job meant flying low and slow over guns whose whole trade was hitting things at range. Anything that went down there would be shot at. The Thunderbolt was built to be shot at and to come back. Carried a battery. 8 50 caliber Brownings sat in the wings, 4 to a side. Together they made a wall of heavy machine gun fire that could tear open a truck, a rail car, a half-track, or the thin top plate of a tank. Under the wings and belly, it hauled up to 2,500 pounds of bombs, or 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, each one able to gut a vehicle. Could loiter. It had the fuel and the range to roam behind the German front for a long stretch, hunting, and the men who flew it did exactly that. They called it armed reconnaissance. Be off. Cross the lines. Attack anything military that moves. Cash that into what it did to the 88, and the reversal comes into focus. The gun was deadly to a tank that came at it across open ground. It was helpless against a fighter that owned the sky over the road behind it. A dug-in 88 firing from a hedgerow gave itself away with the smoke and the muzzle blast of the first shot, and a Thunderbolt orbiting overhead saw that. A 5-ton gun being towed to a new position was a slow, obvious target strung out on a road, and the Jug came down the road at it with 8 guns and rockets. The Germans learned this fast and paid for the lesson every day. The sky was clear. One American officer turned that advantage into a system. His name was Elwood Quesada, and he commanded the 9th Air Force fighters that worked directly over the ground troops. Quesada did something no one had done well before. He put a radio in a lead Sherman tank and sat an experienced pilot inside the tank as a controller, riding with the armored spearhead. Overhead, flights of 4 Thunderbolts kept station above the advancing column. When the tanks ran into a gun or a strong point they could not see, the controller on the ground talked the pilots onto it, and the aircraft that could see the whole board from above came down on the target the tankers could not reach. They called it armored column cover, and it turned the fighter bomber from a raider that happened to be passing into a permanent scout and hammer that moved with the tanks. A dug-in 88 that opened fire on the spearhead now had a pilot watching for its muzzle blast and a radio ready to send 4 fighters down on it within a minute. The gun's oldest strength, that it fired first and stayed hidden, began to work against it, because firing was the thing that gave it away to the sky. The place that showed it whole was Mortain in the first week of August 1944. Put yourself now on the German side of it, in the crew of a gun or the cab of a half-track on the road east of Mortain before dawn on the 7th of August. Field Marshal von Kluge has been ordered by Hitler to throw the panzer divisions west, to cut the Americans in half and reach the sea. The operation is called Lüttich. Hitler wanted 8 armored divisions in it. Von Kluge could gather 4, about 300 tanks. The spearhead is the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich. In the dark, it works. The tanks push west through the American lines, and the 30th Infantry Division is nearly cut off, its forward observers clinging to a bare rise called Hill 314, calling artillery down onto the German columns. Through the night, the darkness is your cover. You can move. Then the morning fog burns off, and the sky belongs to the other side. That day, the 19th Tactical Air Command flew about 400 sorties over the Mortain battlefield. 7 rocket-armed Thunderbolts of the 406th Fighter Group worked the roads where the German armor was jammed nose to tail, and they fired something near 600 rockets. By the pilot's own reckoning, they left 12 or 13 panzers wrecked, along with half-tracks and staff cars. The light flak guns that tried to shield the column went down with them. Those numbers come from cockpit reports, and they stay claims, because a pilot at speed cannot confirm a wreck the way a man on the ground can. But the larger truth does not depend on the exact tally. The German attack that started so well in the dark stalled and broke apart in the daylight, and it collapsed with the sky full of fighter bombers the panzer crews could not answer. From the road, it felt like being pinned in the open. the very thing the 88 needed, the ability to sit in a chosen spot and dominate the ground in front of it, required first getting there, and getting there meant the road, and the road in daylight belonged to the Jabot, a gun crew that tried to reposition in the open hours was a target strung out and slow. A column halted under attack could not spread its 5-ton guns off the road fast enough to hide them. The counterstroke that was meant to reach the coast never cleared the ground around Mortain, and daylight movement became the thing that finished you. That is what the Germans meant by the word. Jabot was their shorthand for the fighter bomber, and it entered their language as dread. Photographs of German soldiers in France that summer show men on the ground with their faces turned up, scanning the sky. Whole units reorganized their lives around the sun. They moved by night and lay hidden by day, because to be caught on an open road at noon was to be caught by the Thunderbolts. The man who said it best commanded the Panzer Division, one of the best equipped armored formations in the German army. His name was Fritz Bayerlein, and he had served in the desert under Rommel. Bayerlein's men gave the stretch of road they had to use a name of their own. They called it the Jabot Rennstrecke, the fighter-bomber racecourse, because to drive it in daylight was to run a gauntlet of diving aircraft. Bayerlein moved his division west by night for exactly that reason, trickling it forward in the hours of darkness, because the daylight roads were death to armor and guns and the trucks that fed them. A general who had beaten the British in the open desert now planned his marches around when the sun was down. Take the daylight road away, and the 88 lost the freedom it was built around. The gun's whole method assumed it could choose its ground. It needed to be positioned early, dug in low, sighted down a long field, waiting for tanks to come to it. All of that assumed the crew could get the gun where it needed to be and keep it fed and keep it hidden. Take away the daylight road and you take away the choosing. A gun that can only be moved at night is a gun that arrives late, sights in a hurry, and cannot follow a shifting battle. The Thunderbolt never had to fire on the 88 tube to tube. It only had to own the sky over every road the gun depended on, and the gun's advantage bled away. The corroboration piles up beyond Mortain. A week earlier, during the American breakout called Cobra, a long German column caught on the roads near the town of Roncy gave the Thunderbolts the richest hunting of the campaign. Trapped nose to tail with nowhere to turn off, the column sat under the fighter bombers of the 405th Fighter Group. The pilots claimed something on the order of 120 tanks, along with 11 guns and better than 250 other vehicles in that one action. On the 29th of July, another fighter-bomber group claimed 46 tanks and more than 80 vehicles in a single day. These are pilot claims again, and post-war men who walked the ground found that many of the vehicles had been abandoned as much as hit. But abandoned is its own kind of defeat. A crew that leaves a working gun on the road because the sky is full of Thunderbolts has already lost the use of it, and the road at Roncy was left choked with German armor that never fired another shot in Normandy. All across the Normandy pocket that August, as the German army tried to pull back east through a closing gap, the roads filled with vehicles that could not move by day. The fighter bombers of the American 9th Air Force and the British squadrons alongside them worked those roads until they were choked with wrecked trucks, guns, and horse-drawn wagons. The German army that had priced every Norman lane in burning Shermans found its own retreat priced the same way from the air. When the pocket around Falaise finally closed later in August, the wreckage left inside it ran to something like 200 tanks and assault guns, 300 artillery pieces, and 5,000 vehicles of every kind. A great many of them had been worked over from the air as they crawled toward the one gap still open. Post-war counters again found many machines abandoned rather than struck, but the point held either way. The 88 and its prime mover and the columns they belonged to could not survive on an open road in daylight, so they were left where they stood. The gun that had made the open ground lethal was itself caught in the open, hitched to a slow half-track under a sky it did not own. There is an honesty owed here, and it belongs in the story rather than outside it. The 88 was never destroyed as a type. Guns kept firing to the last week of the war, and a dug-in 88 in good cover remained deadly to the very end. Air power did not shoot every gun to pieces. What it did was take away the freedom of movement the gun needed to matter most, and it broke the German ability to mass armor and artillery in daylight and drive it where it was wanted. At Mortain, that was decisive. The counterattack meant to split the American breakout, instead sat under the Thunderbolts and failed, and within days the whole German position in Normandy came apart, and the drive across France was on. For the American tanker in that sunken lane back in July, the change was concrete. Early in the campaign, meeting an 88 in the open meant taking losses and calling for infantry and artillery and time. By August, the tanker had a partner overhead. A gun that fired and revealed itself might have a Thunderbolt on it within minutes. A German column trying to bring guns forward could be broken up before it ever dug in. The tanker was not asked to win the duel at a mile alone anymore. The Jug had changed the ground he fought on by owning the sky above it. That is the reversal, paid in full. The 88 ruled a mile of open ground and burned tanks that could not touch it, and for 2 months in Normandy it set the price of every road. Then a heavy American fighter with 8 50 caliber guns and a load of rockets took the daylight sky away from the gun and everything that fed it, and the crews who had made others fear the open ground learned to fear the open sky. They moved by night and hid by day. They gave their own roads the name racecourse. The gun that could not be missed at a mile became a gun that could not cross a road in daylight, and the counterattack at Mortain that was meant to reach the sea never got past the first clear morning. Alexander Kartvel's fat, tough, ugly Jug did that, and so did the pilots who flew it low over the guns. They came home holed and burned. They flew again the next morning. The 88 was one of the finest guns of the war. The Thunderbolt beat it from above by taking the daylight sky its crews had always counted on, and with the sky went the fear the gun had built. Now tell me your side of it. Did you crew a Thunderbolt or fly one? Or did you work the guns and radios that kept it in the air? Do you have a photograph of a jug your father or grandfather flew? And which pairing should come next? The tiger and the gun that finally broke it. The panther and the hellcat that hunted it. Say the word in the comments and stay for the next one.